Hello, physical scientist. Ms. Getz here. Today, I'm going to walk you through the World Without an Element summative project. So this project is your only task this week. It has two different things that you're going to turn in for it. And I'm going to tell you about all of those right now. So on your project, the whole goal is to really think about what would the world be like if one element disappeared. Um, and so you can think about an element that's really common. I'm going to do my example around oxygen. So if I'm doing oxygen, I'm going to say, oh, what would the world be like if oxygen all of a sudden disappeared and weren't here anymore? And I bet you have some ideas for oxygen right off the top of your head. And that's why I'm not actually going to let you pick oxygen for your project. That's my project. So if oxygen all of a sudden disappeared, well, you know that oxygen is used for some pretty important things like breathing, right? So that would be a big problem. Oxygen is also part of the really important compound called H2O, or water. So if we had no oxygen, then water would also disappear. So I could say, well, if we had no oxygen to breathe, then humans would die. And if we had no oxygen to be part of water, then there would be no oceans or lakes or rivers, and then the Earth's crust wouldn't erode. And I could keep thinking about all of these different things that would happen. It's the whole goal of the project to say, what would the world be like? And when you're going to share your learning with this project, what you learned about what the world would be like without your element, you're going to do it in a creative way. So your goal is to understand your element well enough to describe the world without it creatively in some form that is interesting to you. So you could write a story in either a Google Doc or Notability. You could have it be like diary entries. Like I could have day 1. There's starting to be less oxygen in the atmosphere, dun dun dun. And then I could talk about it and have it be dramatized. And then I could have day 2, and so on, right? So I could have this diary entry. You could have a story with like little chapters. So diaries are from the first person. A story could be about someone. I could have it just be a short story that doesn't necessarily have to have chapters. Lots of ways to write a story. So if you like writing, great option for you. If you like being a little bit more artistic, you can show a lot with pictures. So you could make a children's storybook, or even just a story that has some illustrations. You could do it virtually or on paper. Either one is totally fine, and either one can be really cool. Maybe you like doing more digital art or using different apps. You could use Educreations. You could use some other app that you have on your iPad to do sort of a video narration story combo. You could make a video or a movie trailer. I've had some students make really, really successful videos about this topic, saying, okay, well, what happened if this element suddenly disappeared? You could make a comic book. So that would be sort of like a storybook, except it's going to be a different style, right? You're going to have different illustrations. So if you really like drawing, that would be a really great option for you as well. So this whole project is all about what would the world be like if my element suddenly disappeared. So I have the rubric for you. I'm going to talk it over very briefly. But whenever you see one of these rubrics, you want to look at the top grade because you want to get the top grade. So we're going to look at the top grade here, which is the 7/8, 100% highest grade possible. That's what you want to shoot for. So here it says, discuss and evaluate the problems resulting from your missing element and the suitability of potential replacement elements. And you're like, this gets, it's okay. I've got the little italicized bit is a little easier to understand. So it's a discussion and an evaluation. So that means you're like talking about what would happen. And evaluation means you're saying a little bit more about like why that is the case. Stating the reasons that your missing element is a problem. Why is it a problem that oxygen is disappearing? That's my element, not yours. You can't pick oxygen. So I'm going to really state those ideas, like why is that a problem? I'm going to go in depth on, well, why do humans need oxygen to breathe? Why is it important that we have oxygen to have water? Why will it be bad if that disappears? What problems will that cause? So that's really going in depth. Why is it a problem? And what causes those problems about your element going away? And then the other part of getting an A here is suggesting a similar element that could replace yours and evaluate how well it replaces your element. So like, for example, oxygen is a gas that we can breathe here in the atmosphere. And there's another gas in the atmosphere called nitrogen. And nitrogen is pretty similar to oxygen. So in my creative story, I might say that people tried to see if they could replace what we breathe with nitrogen instead of oxygen. And I could talk about how well would that work to have nitrogen be the thing that our lungs use. Could it be possible or not? And so I would suggest this similar element, and would it really work that well? And this is the bulk of your project. These other two columns on the rubric are important as well. So we want to make sure that when you're using scientific language, you're using it as clearly and precisely as possible. If there's a word you don't know, don't use it. Make sure that you look up words before using them in your project. And then this one is a pretty straightforward one where you're completely documenting all sources, which I think my video might cover up for you, but you can see it on your handout, so that I'll show you in just a sec. So you're going to be making a bibliography of all the sources that you use, is what this column is all about. So again, the whole idea of our project, what would the world be like without an element? And to really bump it up a level, what's an element that could maybe replace it, and like, would it work? So to help you, we've assembled a couple of things. We have 3.2, which is your research guide, and that's a graphic organizer. I'll show you it in a sec. But also on 3.2, I have some linked resources for you. These are all of the ones you'll find there. Encyclopedia Britannica is really awesome because you can decide what reading level you would prefer. And they have most chemical elements have like a really good page about them at different reading levels. So if you want it to be like pretty easy to read, you can pick the elementary. Or if you're like, I want it to be not super hard to read, go for middle school level. Chem for Kids has really good articles about the first 36 elements. The smaller an element that you pick from the periodic table, the easier this project is going to be for you. Then the Royal Society of Chemistry has some pretty concise info, maybe kind of a higher reading level, but it's pretty concise. That means it's short, so it's easy to check out. And those periodic videos we watched at the beginning of the quarter might also be a good place to start. So these are all of the resources I have for you in the linked resources. And then there's a graphic organizer. We'll talk about that in a second. It looks like this, that you'll use to help you organize your research. So that's 3.2. And you are going to turn in your research for this project to get some formative credit for the project. But the project itself, you're going to turn in on 3.3. So this is going to be your summative grade for this project. And it really, I've got to stress this, it has to be creative. You're not saying, here's a research project all about what oxygen is and what it's like and what it's used for. No, I don't want to know when oxygen was discovered or why oxygen is used for a specific thing unless it's relevant to your creative story of what the world is like without oxygen. And again, you can't do oxygen. That's my element. So there are many, many options. I showed them to you at the beginning. I'll show them to you again at the end. But you can also think creatively about a different kind of option to share this creative story. But I just really want to stress, this is not a research paper or a research presentation. It's a creative description of what the world is like without your element. So when you're doing your research, we have this research guide for you that helps you sort of walk through the things that are going to be useful to learn about to say what the world is like without an element. You want to know, what's the element used for? It's the first thing. What are the uses of your element? What do humans use it for? What is it used for just in like plants and animals for life? Like oxygen, we like to breathe it. What's important about it or makes it unique? So that's the first thing. You want to really learn about your element. Then what elements are kind of similar to your element? If yours is a gas, what other elements are a gas? If yours is a hard metal or a flexible metal, what other elements are like that? And so you'll do a little bit of research there. You can look at the periodic table, elements nearby it. on the periodic table, in fact, in the same column, up, down, are going to be most similar. And ask your teacher if you're struggling with this. Then the third step in doing your research is actually kind of not doing the research, but thinking about it. So the third step is, what would the world be like without your element? And like, what could maybe replace it? How well would it work? So really doing that thinking of like, well, I know that my element's used for this, so what problems would there be if we couldn't do that thing anymore? And then the whole time, you want to be saving any websites or resources that you're using so that you can cite them in your bibliography at the very end when you're making your final product for your project. So this is your research guide. Along the way, you might use the Chem4Kids website, which again has really great descriptions. So here's oxygen. Oxygen, you can find it in the ozone layer. It's in plastics. Ooh, we like to breathe it. We knew that already. I didn't know about the plastics thing though, so I've learned something. You'll notice Chem4Kids is like got some nice pictures, and it's like pretty easy to understand. It's a good reading level. Here we have the Royal Society of Chemistry about oxygen. It's got a lot more like scientific data that may or may not be very useful for you, but the uses and properties are pretty nice. It's used in the steel industry. Interesting. So I can see some things here. This reading level is a little bit higher, even though it's pretty short text. But I'm going to go along and do my research, write down in my research guide. And then once you've completed your research, you can start on your final product. So this is an example of the beginning of a comic book a student made for their project here. And so they're saying, oh, it may look like Earth. We have insects and plants, and there's humans. But this world is a secret. It has no nitrogen. And so they have this dramatic comic book about what the world would be like without nitrogen. Here's an example of a story final product for oxygen. That's my element. You can't pick oxygen. That's kind of a spoof on the Hunger Games. It's called The Breathing Games, where we don't have oxygen in our world. And so once you've done your research, you'll want to decide what kind of final product you want, and then spend some time making it. And again, as a reminder, final product has to be creative. It can be a story. It can be a story with illustrations in a kid's book or a comic book. It can be a video. If you have another creative option, feel free to ask your teacher. But that is your project. And you're going to have, I hope, a lot of fun learning about your element and then really thinking about what would happen if it disappeared. Feel free to reach out when you need help. Good luck. You can do this. Bye, guys.